Ever feel like
Subscribe
you're
for
just
more
going through
videos.
the motions? Like everything's just so dot routine. Now, picture that feeling, but swap out your boring Tuesday with the absolute terror of a plane ripping open thousands of feet in the air. That's the story we're diving into today. Aloha Airlines Flight 243. We're using this video by Dhruv Rathee to break down this insane incident. It's 1988, a Boeing 737, a routine flight from Hilo to Honolulu. Imagine a beautiful Hawaiian day. Everything seems totally normal until, well, it isn't.
And get this, the plane had already flown 8 round trips that day. 8!
Talk about routine, right?
8 trips.
Wow.
Oh, okay, so we've got our seemingly normal flight, passengers getting settled, maybe picturing themselves on the beach when things get real. And this was the what-ifs start to get heavy. One passenger actually spots a crack in the plane's fuselage. Now, I'm not an aircraft mechanic or anything, but I'm pretty sure the fuselage is kind of important, right?
Yeah, you could say that. It's basically the main body of the plane.
Right, like essential. So this passenger sees this crack and just figures, hey, the airline must know about this, right? It's a scary thought, because how many times have we all just trusted that things are being taken care of? But in this case, that trust was misplaced, to say the least.
It's like that moment in a movie where you see something's off, and you just want to yell, "Don't get on that!" But of course, it's too late. They're already in the air, climbing to 24,000 feet.
And then, boom. 20 minutes into the flight, a section of the cabin roof just tears off.
I can't even imagine. I mean, the terror inside that cabin, the roar of wind where a roof should be. Dhruv Rathee mentions the temperature plummeted to something crazy like negative 45 degrees Celsius. People are getting hit with debris. They're looking up at the open sky. It's just unthinkable.
It's what's known as explosive decompression, and it's every flyer's nightmare.
Explosive decompression. That sounds exactly like what it is.
Yeah, it's basically like what happens when you know those balloons that have happy birthday on the side?
Yeah.
Imagine blowing one up way past its limit. That's kind of what's happening to the air pressure inside the cabin.
And that's what ripped the roof off.
Well, that plus those micro cracks in the fuselage may be made worse by, all those previous flights.
Right. All those takeoffs and landings.
It all adds up.
And if that wasn't bad enough, the oxygen masks, the things that are supposed to save you in this exact situation, they malfunctioned.
Yeah. Total system failure. You've got people gasping for air at 24,000 feet, some passing out from the lack of oxygen.
Pure chaos. Dhruv talks about one flight attendant, Michelle Honda, and you can just feel her desperation. She's trying to find anyone who can fly the plane, thinking the pilots are done for.
It's like something out of a movie, except it's actually happening.
And what about the pilots? Were they okay?
You won't believe this.
What?
They were alive.
No way.
Yeah. Somehow, the cockpit was still in one piece, partially exposed but intact. Both pilots were strapped in, their oxygen masks were working. It was a miracle.
That's incredible. Talk about cheating death. So what happens next? I mean, they're missing part of the plane.
Right, but they're alive and they've got to land this thing.
I'm on the edge of my seat here.
Well, the captain, Robert Schornsheim, he had been flying with Aloha Airlines for over a decade. This was a veteran pilot who knew his stuff, but even for him, this was, unheard of.
I bet. What do they even do in that situation?
They had to think fast and stay calm. They started by trying to control the plane, which was becoming increasingly difficult, and they were losing altitude fast.
So they had to find an airport and quickly.
Exactly. Luckily, they were pretty close to Kahului Airport on the island of Maui, so they aimed for that.
Makes sense. Closer is better when your plane is literally falling apart.
Exactly. And then, as if things couldn't get any worse, they realized the nose of the plane was seriously damaged.
Damaged how?
It was drooping.
Drooping? You mean like a...
Yeah, like a sad puppy dog.
Are you serious? The front of the plane was sagging.
Pretty much. The only thing holding it on was the floor of the plane.
No way. How are they even flying at that point?
I don't know how, but they were.
This is insane. So what happened? Did they make it to Maui? So last we heard, Aloha Airlines Flight 243 is, it's missing a chunk of its roof and barely holding it together. They're trying to make it to Maui with a drooping nose and a whole lot of hope.
It's honestly a miracle they stayed airborne.
Right. So they're approaching Maui. What happens next?
Well, they're getting ready to land, which, let's be real, is already a nerve-wracking experience, but with a damaged plane. The tension must have been off the charts.
I can't even imagine.
And to make matters worse, they realized the nose gear is shot.
The nose gear? Wait, so they might have to do a belly landing.
That was the very real and terrifying possibility.
But isn't that super dangerous? especially with how damaged the plane already was.
Absolutely. I mean, even under the best circumstances, belly landings are risky business. But in this case, with the nose of the plane already in bad shape.
Doesn't bear thinking about.
One of the investigators actually said, and I quote, "The airplane, in the condition it was in, needed that nose gear because when the nose touched down on the runway, it would have broken the airplane apart.
Whoa, they could have just disintegrated on impact.
Essentially, it would have been catastrophic.
Okay, now I really need to know, did they make it?
Against all odds, they did.
Get out of here. They landed that plane.
They did. Captain Scorenheim and First Officer Tompkins somehow managed to land that plane safely in Maui.
That's unbelievable. What an incredible story of skill and what, just composure under pressure.
Absolutely. The passengers, the crew, everyone on the ground, they all witnessed a remarkable feat that day.
They definitely earned those pilot wings. But we can't forget, this isn't just a story about a miraculous landing. There were people hurt. And tragically, there was a life lost.
Right. Flight attendant C.B. Lansing, she was tragically swept out of the plane during the decompression.
That's heartbreaking.
It really highlights the human cost of these kinds of incidents, even when the outcome seems miraculous.
Absolutely. And on top of that, 84 other people were injured.
Yeah.
Some quite seriously.
Broken bones, lacerations, even a passenger with a fractured skull. It really gives you a sense of the violent forces at play during that decompression.
It's a sobering reminder that even with a good outcome, these incidents leave their mark. Speaking of which, what happened after everyone was safely on the ground? I mean, surely there had to be a massive investigation into what caused this.
Oh, absolutely. The National Transportation Safety Board, the NTSB, they launched a full-blown investigation.
And what did they find? Was it pilot error? Mechanical failure?
Well, it wasn't just one thing, that's for sure. It was a perfect storm of factors, a cascade of failures that led to this near catastrophe.
A cascade of failures?
Yeah.
That sounds ominous. What were some of these factors?
Well, first, there was the issue of metal fatigue.
Right, we were talking about that earlier. But what does that even mean? How does metal get tired?
Think about it like this. Every time a plane takes off and lands, it goes through a pressurization cycle. The air inside the cabin expands and contracts, putting stress on the fuselage.
And this plane, remember, it had already flown 8 round trips that day alone.
Exactly. And over time, all those cycles, they take their toll, especially on older aircraft. It's like bending a paperclip back and forth. Eventually, it's going to snap.
Makes sense. So the plane was basically worn out.
In a way, yes. But it wasn't just normal wear and tear. The investigation also found evidence of something called explosive decompression.
Okay, that sounds intense. What is that exactly?
It's basically when tiny cracks in the metal, some too small to see with the naked eye, they link up almost instantaneously under the pressure of the cabin at high altitude.
So it's like all those tiny cracks were just waiting for the right moment to explode.
In a sense, yes. And the pressure at 24,000 feet was more than enough to cause that kind of catastrophic failure.
Wow. So it was a combination of the plane being worn out and this explosive decompression. But that still doesn't fully explain how it happened, does it? I mean, aren't there systems in place to catch these things?
You'd think so, right? But that's where the investigation pointed to another major contributing factor, Aloha Airlines' maintenance program.
So Aloha Airlines really dropped the ball on their maintenance.
Yeah.
What were they doing wrong?
Well, the investigation found a bunch of issues. They weren't supervising repairs properly. Their inspections weren't thorough enough. It seemed like they were cutting corners on safety.
Cutting corners on airplane safety. Not the best idea.
You got that right.
And to think, this was all happening under the FAA's watch. Didn't they notice any of this?
Well, that's the thing about these kinds of disasters. It's rarely just one organization or person messing up. The FAA did have guidelines about inspecting for cracks in the fuselage, especially in older planes.
So they were aware of the issue.
They knew it was a thing, yeah. But the problem was they hadn't specifically said that every single joint on the fuselage needed to be checked.
Oh, I see. So kind of a loophole in the system?
You could say that. Plus, it seems like they weren't really on top of how Aloha Airlines was handling their maintenance.
It sounds like a recipe for disaster. A whole bunch of oversights and assumptions that added up to this.
Exactly. And tragically, it took this incident to really shake things up.
Yeah, but at least it did lead to changes.
Oh, for sure. This whole thing was a huge wake-up call for the aviation industry.
Like, okay, we really need to get our act together.
Exactly. They realized they couldn't just rely on old methods and hope for the best. So one of the biggest changes was the creation of the Aging Aircraft Safety Program in 1991.
Aging Aircraft Safety Program. Makes sense. So what did that do?
It basically said, hey, we need to treat older planes with extra care, especially the ones flying short hops all the time.
Mhm.
They put in place way stricter inspection and maintenance rules specifically for these older planes.
So more frequent inspections, I'm guessing?
More frequent, but also more thorough. They started using new tech like ultrasonic testing and eddy current technology.
Hold on, Eddie, current technology. That sounds pretty high tech. What is that?
It's a way to see inside the metal, find those micro cracks that are invisible to the naked eye.
That's wild. So it's like they were playing catch up with technology to make up for lost time.
It's one way to look at it, but the most important change wasn't just the technology itself, it was a whole new way of thinking about safety.
How so?
Before Flight 243, there was this attitude of, well, it hasn't happened yet, so we're probably good.
Yeah, can see how that kind of thinking can creep in, especially when you're talking about something as complex as aviation.
Right. But this incident, it threw that out the window. Suddenly, everyone had to acknowledge that even routine flights could have hidden dangers.
And that assumptions could cost lives.
Exactly. They realized they couldn't afford to be complacent anymore.
So this one event, as tragic as it was, really did change the entire industry for the better.
It really did. Aloha Airlines Flight 243 became a turning point in aviation safety.
It's kind of amazing when you think about it. This terrifying near disaster ultimately made flying safer for everyone.
It's a powerful reminder that we can learn from even the most difficult experiences.
Absolutely. Well, I have to say, this whole deep dive has been eye-opening. I'm walking away with a whole new appreciation for what goes on behind the scenes to keep us safe in the air.
It's easy to forget when we're up there at 30,000 feet that there's a whole lot of science, engineering, and human effort making it all possible.
So true. And to think, it all comes down to sweating the small stuff, paying attention to detail, and never underestimating the power of speaking up when something seems off.
Absolutely. It's about vigilance, constant improvement, and learning from past mistakes.
Which is what these deep dives are all about. So until next time, thanks.